spoilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
(2024), a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to Sunday with Michael Portillo, a February feast of politics, arts, culture and world affairs. As the United States launches retaliatory strikes throughout the Middle East and prepares to station nuclear weapons in the United Kingdom once more, I'll ask whether we have a political class these days capable of leading us through this period of heightened danger. Can we imagine a British alliance with the United States to rival that of Churchill and Roosevelt, Thatcher and Reagan, or even Blair and Bush? I'll ask my political panel. France has reeled from multiple shocks in recent years, including protests by farmers and the Gilets jaunes, and a string of horrific terrorist attacks. One man believes he has the answers to these problems. The right-winger who came fourth in the last presidential election, Eric Zemmour, gave me an interview in London as he rallies support for another run for the presidency in 2027. Finally, in the first hour, Stefan Kyriazis joins me, fresh from the most expensive theatre show ever produced in London. Plaza Suite with a star cast has garnered rave reviews, but is it worth almost £400 for a ticket? Later on, guests on the programme will try to predict the future of unionism in Northern Ireland as the DUP agrees to re-enter power sharing under a Sinn Féin First Minister. And I'll explore novel ways to enjoy the noble Yorkshire pudding. Before all of that, here are your news headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
Thank you, Michael. Good morning to you. It is 11:01. I'm Aaron Armstrong. UK and US joint strikes against Houthis in Yemen came after repeated warnings, with the Foreign Secretary saying the attacks in the Red Sea must now stop. 36 sites across 13 locations were hit by coalition forces in response to what Lord Cameron says are reckless actions which threaten the freedom of navigation and put innocent lives at risk. The Houthi rebels, backed by Iran, have vowed to respond. Former Defence Minister Tobias Ellwood says Britain was right to take further action.
Our economy and our security are symbiotically interconnected. As we see in the Red Sea, if we don't protect those international shipping lanes, if we don't step forward with other nations, then our way of life is now challenged because of these errant nations taking advantage of our ever-wobbly international rules-based order. Britain does step up. That's who we are as a nation, and we need to start doing it again.
The former Home Secretary says the government's Rwanda plan to deter people smugglers from coming to the UK won't work. Suella Braverman told Camilla Tominey that Rishi Sunak didn't agree to her proposals because they may have upset some communities.
What we were proposing to the Rwanda bill was to exclude individual claims, pretty much, totally, and then also prevent the Strasbourg court from actually blocking flights from taking off. That would have been somewhat controversial amongst the international community, amongst certain sectors, the legal community, for example. And I think that there's a sense that we don't want to upset certain groups.
A man's been arrested on suspicion of dangerous dog offences following the death of a woman in Essex. Police were called to a property in Jaywick where they found a woman with serious injuries. She died at the scene. It's thought she was attacked by 2 dogs. Both were later destroyed. The breed of the animals is yet to be determined. A 39-year-old man remains in custody. The man suspected of a chemical attack continues to evade police. Officers say they're following various lines of inquiry after receiving dozens of calls about Abdul Azedi, including possible sightings. He was last caught on camera at London's King's Cross station heading south. And that was after a woman and her 2 children were attacked. The woman remains in hospital with what's thought to be life-changing injuries. Former Met Police officer Norman Brennan believes time is against Azedi, who also has a significant wound on his face.
He's in severe pain. I would suggest sepsis or something like that is very likely to kick in, because when you have acid injuries, you need immediate emergency treatment. Well, we're 4 days on now. He's got quite a horrific injury. He's easily identifiable, but there are times where the police are looking for suspects where they temporarily outwit us. That's why the public have more eyes than the police. The police are doing all the background work.
Well, Shadow Minister Sir Chris Bryant says serious questions need to be asked after Azedi, who is from Afghanistan, was granted asylum after being rejected twice.
I do look at this horrific acid attack this week, and I want to go, I'm sorry, I don't want to undermine the particular tribunal, but I have no idea, if all the facts that we've been told from the papers are true, how on earth that person was granted asylum. So yes, of course, we've always got to look at the rules to make sure that fundamentally we, the British people, are safe.
Demonstrators who climb war memorials could face 3 months in prison and a fine of £1,000. Pro-Palestinian protesters scaled the Royal Artillery Memorial in London following a demonstration outside Parliament in November. The Home Secretary, James Cleverly, has described it as an insult and says it can't continue. The measure will apply across England and Wales and is set to be introduced in the House of Commons. The mother of murdered teenager Brianna Ghey has called for a ban on social media apps for under-16s. 2 15-year-olds killed Brianna with a knife in Cheshire last year. Her mother says she wants to see special phones for children with restricted access to social media apps, or for inappropriate search terms to be flagged to parents. Scarlett Jenkinson, who was jailed on Friday, watched videos of torture and murder online before attacking Brianna. A new cancer vaccine made by the pharmaceutical firm Moderna is being trialled on British patients. The mRNA technology used to make COVID-19 jabs works by helping the body recognise and fight cancer cells. Experts say the vaccines can lead to a generation of off-the-shelf cancer therapies. And the vaccine is aimed at people with advanced melanoma, lung cancer and other solid tumour cancers. If you want more on all of our stories, you can sign up to our alerts, scan the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Michael.
Thank you, Aaron Armstrong. The House of Commons Defence Committee has concluded that the government will never achieve war-fighting or strategic readiness without urgent reforms. Meanwhile, the United Kingdom is set once more to host American nuclear weapons, a reaction, it's said, to the increasing threat posed by Russia. The West confrontation with Iran notched up a gear this week as the United States responded to the killing of 3 of its servicemen with aerial attacks across Syria and Iraq. Do we have today a political class that we can trust to lead us through this period of heightened danger? Can we hope for the kind of leadership provided by Churchill and Roosevelt, by Thatcher and Reagan, and Blair and Bush? To answer that question, I'm joined by my politics panel, all of them former political advisors. Matthew Lazar to the Labour Party, Joe Phillips to Paddy Ashdown of the Lib Dems, and Charlie Rowley to Michael Gove of the Conservatives. First of all, Matthew, do you think it has yet occurred to Sir Keir Starmer that if he becomes Prime Minister, his period of government may be dominated by defence or possibly even by war?
I think it probably has, actually. I mean, I think that Keir has thought a lot about the Labour's relationship with defence as an issue. He's made NATO, which was one of the proudest achievements of the Labour government after the Second World War, one of the, he's focused on NATO as something that Labour has historically been committed to and should be the cornerstone of commitment going forward. So I think, yes, he's thought about it, but I'm not sure that anybody in this country realises quite what changed circumstances we're in and how that's going to impact every aspect of our politics, because too often we thought about it, it's just about defence policy, but as we know, it isn't just about that, because you've got to pay for it, you've got to work out what the impact on society is, etc. So I think, yes, there's some thinking being done, but it's probably a bigger issue that anybody has yet woken up to.
Let's say for a moment that his commitment is not in doubt. Unfortunately, what we may be talking about is a sea change in our arrangements. Notice what the House Commons Defence Committee has said, that without urgent reforms, we will never reach strategic readiness. By the way, the Ministry of Defence counters that £50 billion is being spent a year on defence, which I suppose is a way of saying that they spend it very ineffectively. I mean, is Sir Keir Starmer ready to lead us into a situation where we would have to rearrange our priorities of public spending, boost what we do for defence, and possibly begin to involve the public in thinking about how it resists a war?
Well, I think it's very important they have that conversation right at the beginning of a Labour government, so that they are honest with the British people early on that this is a changed world, and a changed world will need, as you say, changed arrangements, which means not only increasing defence spending, but being honest with the electorate that means either an impact on other public services or preventing future tax cuts. And one of the things I found particularly sort of depressing this week is we've sort of seen a headline saying we're going to have 1p off national insurance from the Tories, but we haven't had the discussion about the fact that there are going to be new commitments. Where's the money going to come from? Now, at the moment, to be fair, I'm not sure that Labour has quite had that conversation it needs to, and I think what we need to watch is who becomes Defence Secretary in a Labour government. At the moment, it's John Healey, who's a very nice chap, but he's not exactly a heavy hitter in the Labour Party, and I think you might find that somebody of a rather more higher profile or somebody with rather more determination will be put into that role.
That's a very interesting point. Charlie, for the Conservatives, does Rishi Sunak look like a war leader to you?
Well, first of all, I'd agree with Matthew about the Shadow Defence Secretary becoming Defence Secretary. I don't think that'll be any hope at all.
Well, I love agreement in the studio, but please come to the point.
But the other thing is, obviously, Sir Keir Starmer becoming Prime Minister, this was a man that backed Jeremy Corbyn, don't forget, who wanted to get rid of the nuclear deterrent, which the US are now having to work with the UK in order to prevent those current threats that you see, particularly against Russia. So I think he would not be able to...
I rather feel that things have moved on. My question to you was, can you see Rishi Sunak as a war leader?
Yes, I can. And I think the action that he's taken against the Houthis, which is targeted, proportionate and right, sending in airstrikes to target those particular individuals that are blocking that trading route within the Red Sea, which is also attacked or attempted to attack HMS Diamond, a UK warship. I think that is the right approach, and it is something that he decided on the back of evidence, on the back of meeting those generals, the people that really are responsible and know what's going on in international terms, and who know the real threats to the UK. He took that decision. It was the right one, and I think he would be able to take big decisions going forward where they need it.
Charlie, tell me about the governing skill that it takes to spend £50 billion a year to have 11 surface warships afloat only, to have our aircraft carrier Queen Elizabeth not able to leave Portsmouth because it's damaged, to have our destroyer that's on site in the Red Sea actually unable to fire missiles because it doesn't have missiles. What kind of governing skill has it taken to spend so much money and achieve so little?
That is a very good question, and I think what the Defence Secretary or previous Defence Secretaries, I suppose, would be saying if they were sat here is that they've always asked for more money. They've always asked for.
But I'm saying the money is being badly spent. If I were in the Treasury, I wouldn't give them a penny more because they spend it so badly.
Well, I think there needs to certainly be someone going into the MOD to look under the car bonnet to make sure that everything is working as it should.
That's a full solution. Thank you very much.
I'm afraid that might not have happened too readily at the moment. But I think, look, defence spending is clearly something that is going to be dominating the news for some time to come. It's something that clearly needs to continue to happen. I mean, Ben Wallace, for all of his, as a former army officer himself, campaigned tirelessly to get more funding for the MOD, which he did. How that money is spent, you're absolutely right, might be something that needs slightly more scrutiny, but it is absolutely right to still commit spending to our defence.
Yeah, Joe Phillips, the Lib Dems are nowhere on this issue. I associate no thought about defence with your party whatsoever.
No, it's funny, isn't it? But actually... I mean, if you go back to my time of working for Paddy, yes, Michael, you had Paddy Ashdown, who possibly many people would say was the best Foreign Secretary we never had. You had Ming Campbell, Foreign Affairs spokesman. You had good, sensible, grown-up people who were having cross-party conversations with people. And I think, although the Lib Dems are not in any way key players in this, I think at the beginning of this section you talked about relationships, you talked about Thatcher and Reagan. But it's about relationships around the world as well. It's not just with your allies. It was Thatcher and Gorbachev as well.
Yes, it was. That's a good point.
It was Blair and Bush, Blair and Clinton. What we have, as we know, elections all over the world this year. The biggest elephant, literally, in the room is that orange elephant that might be walking into the White House later this year. So we would end up with Donald Trump.
You've shifted some way from the Lib Dems.
Well,
what is the Lib Dems' defence policy? Do you have the statesmanship that the other two parties lack?
I think the Lib Dems have the ability to look at a broader range of things because they're not trying to make an impact in the same way.
Well, you're succeeding very well in not making that impact.
No, but I think, Rishi Sunak, I actually agree with Charlie. I think Rishi Sunak is probably OK if we would get to the point of a war leader because he's quite evidence-based, he's quite thoughtful. I think Sir Keir Starmer, again, with his background as a lawyer, is going to be evidence-based. Neither of those two, and certainly not Ed Davey, are going to be pushing for an instant knee-jerk reaction. And I think the Lib Dems have got the ability to have a conversation across party, because if we get to the stage where things are that bad, it does need to be a cross-party conversation.
Matthew, I'm going to give the last word to you, but I want you to imagine a situation in which defence and war become, for the next Labour government, what COVID was for the early part of this Conservative government. Tell me, for the early part of this administration, last election, I mean, of course. Tell me what that would be like. Tell me what it would do to the Labour Party.
Well, I think it would actually be easier for the Labour Party to cope with than people think. Obviously, Labour was part of the Second World War government, and it was also, as I say, NATO meant that, the big debate about free glasses versus nuclear weapons in the post-war Labour government. But I think it's absolutely key that the conversation is had honestly and openly. It's needed a heavy hitter as Defence Secretary, and Keir needs to make quite clear that we can't have our cake and eat it, that if we're going to have stronger defence, Brexit, we're going to have to pay for it.
You know, a frequent sight would be, very possibly, Keir Starmer and Donald Trump appearing together in the White House at neighbouring podia. Tricky.
Very tricky, but not unconquerable. Let's remember that although Bush and Blair became pally, some would argue too pally, they, of course, came from very different perspectives. I mean, the Labour Party was intertwined with the Clintonites to the extent that the Clintonites, the lessons from Little Rock was literally the name of the strategy that got Labour elected in 97. So, you can find that adaptability is not beyond a Labour Prime Minister.
I knew George Bush, he was no Donald Trump.
Thank goodness.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Charlie Rowley and Joe Phillips. After the break, Eric Zemmour, the right-winger who came fourth in the last presidential election, speaks to me about immigration into France and the small boats crisis. Stay with us, please.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Eric Zemmour, who ran for president in France in August 2022, describes himself as a Bonapartist, but his critics call him racist and Islamophobic. The right-wing politician and commentator has been twice successfully prosecuted in France, including for racist hate speech, for which he was fined €10,000. Nonetheless, his high-profile campaign in the 2022 election won him 7% of the vote in the first round. Once eliminated, he endorsed the nationalist Marine Le Pen. As farmers' protests grow across France and much of Europe, I interviewed Zemmour in London as he seeks to build a new political campaign.
How would you describe the condition of France today?
I think that France is living through a crisis on many fronts, and that demonstrates a global decline. We've had an agricultural crisis in recent days. We're experiencing an immigration crisis. We have seen the figures. We'll speak about it. We are living through an economic and social crisis with low wages and growing inflation. I think that we chose the wrong system. For 40 years, our elite imposed upon us a global system, which was based on consumption, immigration, debt, and taxes. I propose a complete change of paradigm and model, which means a model which is based on French birth rates, on production, on work, on making taxes lower. I propose a complete revolution because the system of the last 40 years has driven us to decline and decadence.
What is your policy for immigration?
For immigration, we have to understand where we are now. We're living through an immigration invasion and the appearance of another people on our land, Arabic, Muslim people who don't identify themselves with French customs and cultures, who impose their own customs and their own history. They are colonizing growing parts of the French territory. So we must stop all kinds of immigration, which means legal and illegal immigration. I'm giving you the numbers. 320,000 legal entries per year, which is the population of the city of Nantes, plus 150,000 asylum seekers who are accepted or rejected, who never leave anyway. You have 500,000 legal entries every year, which means that every 5 years you have the equivalent of the city full of Paris, full of foreigners. After this, you have to add illegal immigration. Expert estimates place it between 600,000 and 1 million illegal immigrants. Facing this tsunami wave of immigration, I can tell you those numbers I just gave to you are unique in French history. We have never had so many immigrants coming to France. To deal with it, the government chose only to fight illegal immigration. The government never fights legal immigration. When it comes to illegal immigration, the government never sends anyone back. The numbers are ridiculous. 12% of the people who had to leave amounts to 250,000 or 300,000. 12% is absurd. I personally think we have to stop first legal immigration, because that's the most important immigration in terms of the numbers. This is the immigration that settles here and changes the composition of our people. So, in relation to this, I'm proposing what we call a reconquête, an immigration shield which is composed of different points that we will present to the people in a referendum. I can give you the different points quickly. It's very easy. Number 1, the end of birthright citizenship. Number 2, the end of family reunion visas. Number 3, the limitation of asylum rights, saved for a few hundred people only, which means coming back to the roots of the law for people such as freedom fighters, for example. Moreover, the request to become an asylum seeker must be asked outside of French territory. This means in French embassies in their own countries. Number 4, all of the foreigners coming as tourists or to work for businesses coming from high-risk immigration countries, mainly such as the Maghreb or Africa, have to make a deposit of 10,000 euros that they will get back when they leave the country. Also, about the 320,000 legal entries I told you. Among them are 100,000 students. I don't think we need those 100,000 African students. Most of them are studying in classes that are already oversubscribed in France. So, We will reduce these numbers drastically to only a few hundred high-level students that we really need. The rest of them, we don't need them, and it adds to more legal immigration as well. Next, we need to get rid of all the welfare benefits, excluding insurance, given to the foreigners. We are the only ones to propose this in the French political spectrum. All the others, even the right-wing parties, even Marine Le Pen's party, propose that the foreigners will benefit from the welfare system after a certain amount of time. I think they should never get welfare benefits coming from the National Solidarity Fund. National solidarity means for national people. This means no family welfare, no national health system benefits, no housing benefits. All of this will be reserved only for French people. We are the only ones to propose this. Then, I propose also the expulsion of all foreigners who pose a serious threat to national security. Delinquents, criminals, and those who've been unemployed for more than 6 months. This is a whole concept that I would put forward as a referendum. You have seen in the last days the story of the French Supreme Court. In truth, I've known for a long time that in France we can't fix the immigration question by using a normal law, because the French Supreme Court established a jurisprudence over decades which blocks all the measures. I have spoken to you about this. So, the only solution is to go via the people, to finally establish a policy which the majority have been waiting for.
Let us suppose for a moment that you were able to halt immigration and that you were able to undertake the expulsions that you have just set out. You would nonetheless have a very large population that was Muslim. And a moment ago, you were saying to me that the problem was that the Muslim population was colonizing France, affecting France with a different culture. So you still have the issue of that Muslim population. What is your policy towards the millions of people who would be Muslims still living in France?
I'm saying to the Muslim people in a frank way, because I don't pretend to believe that Islam is just like any other religion and is compatible with the French Republic, with France. Islam has principles such as jihad and sharia. It is not a religion founded only on faith, but founded on a judicial and political system which imposes on all its members the negation of the individual. The inequalities between men and women, between the Muslims and the infidels or non-believers, all of those things and persecutions against homosexuals. These things are in the Quran. That's not Islamism, that's Islam. We can't tolerate this. Moreover, Islam is a religion which is displayed socially. Islam has never known secularism. Islam has never known itself to be limited into private spaces, like what we've done in France with religion for at least a century. So I'm asking the Muslim people to adapt Islam to France and not the other way round. It's not France that has to adapt to Islam like we've done for decades. I'm saying to the Muslim people, you can believe in Islam and practice your religion, but within private spaces, in your houses or at the mosque, but not in public spaces. The public spaces belong to everyone, as its name suggests. We can't be privatized by a religion that will show itself like that. Moreover, there are principles in the Muslim religion that Muslim people have to renounce. For example, jihad. Against who? Against our French citizens, Christian and Jewish? No, that's not possible. They need to renounce that. So, after the old French principle of assimilation, which means becoming French, French history will become their history, and they will consider French heroes like their ancestors and give French first names to their children. After this, I repeat it, we can be Muslim in France, like we can be Jewish in France or Protestant in France, because in reality, even the Catholic Church had to submit to the rules of the French Republic that they didn't want to hear about at the beginning.
You have been prosecuted repeatedly for discrimination and for the incitement of hatred against Muslims. I think on 2 occasions you were successfully prosecuted. Are you a racist?
Je subis une persécution judiciaire pour délit d'opinion, en vérité.
It was a judicial persecution for expressing my views. We have invented laws in France which forbid and limit drastically the liberty of freedom of speech.
Drastiquement, la liberté d'opinion.
Those so-called hate speeches are a pretext to forbid the free and objective examination of the devastating consequences of immigration for 40 years. I have absolutely no hate for anyone, not for the Muslims or anyone else. I will tell you simply my truth. Liberty. I recall in the past, even the European Court of Justice has said that democracy and freedom means to be able to say things and talk about things that shock people. That's the basis of democracy. You know very well in England, you invented it.
France has this very large immigrant population, or Muslim population that originates outside France at some point in the past. Those people are there. Don't all the people of France have to try to live together? Are you helping the people of France to live together? Or are you inciting dissent, discontent, hatred between the different factions?
Donc moi je dis qu'on peut très bien vivre ensemble.
Me, I say we can live very well together, but we cannot live together with a mix of references and a different civilization's history. We cannot have 2 civilizations on the same soil.
Ça, c'est l'affrontement inéluctable.
This is the inevitable planned clash. So the people that are Muslim have to appropriate and adapt to the French civilization and make French history theirs. Which means a civilization which, I repeat, is Judeo-Christian and Greco-Roman. It is not Islamic, not Arab-Islamic or African.
Vous savez, moi j'en parle à mon aise. Ma famille.
You know that the people, I'm talking at my ease, my family come from an Arab-Muslim region. My ancestors lived for 1,000 years in the middle of an Arab-Muslim territory. My father and grandfather spoke very good Arabic. They listened to Oriental music. They spent their nights listening to Oriental music. While I was listening to the Rolling Stones and Mick Jagger,
Comprenez ce que je veux dire?
you understand what I'm saying? So we can adapt very well to other cultures and assimilate to the French culture.
Mais le problème aujourd'hui,
But the problem today is that we can do it in an individual way. We cannot do it en masse. We have to assimilate individuals. But we can't assimilate people. So first, we need to stop the flow of immigration, then give the choice to the Muslim population, to ask them, do you really want to live with us? In this case, you have to live like us. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. If you don't want to be like us, you have the right to do so. If you want to continue your Islamic identity, I understand very well. I don't criticize this choice, but not in France.
With what you say about the flows of immigrants into France, both legal and illegal, you must be quite pleased that each year tens of thousands of people are choosing to cross the channel in small boats to England.
vous savez, je pense que
You know that the French and English have clashed so many times for 1,000 years. There's the impression that's the only thing they can do, even about topics that should bring them together. So we must come together to hold all of our borders. We must take back control of the Mediterranean. You have a navy, we have a navy, the Italians have a navy. We have to unite together to stop all of those small boats, to prevent them coming to Italy. Because when they arrive in Italy, they come to us in France and then to you.
ils viennent chez nous et ils vont chez vous. Donc, si vous voulez
If you don't want them to come to you, come with us to stop them in the Mediterranean Sea. Those that will come to us and come to you, because we know very well what's going on. Those that want to come to work, come to the UK. Those who want to benefit from our welfare state, come to France. That's roughly speaking the distribution of the immigrants. So that's not eligible. You thought by leaving the European Union, you would take back your sovereignty and you would stop immigration. But you have even more, so you can see that was not the issue. The issue is to stop the immigrants when they're leaving the coast of Libya, Tunisia, and we can do it. We can do it. We have, you and us, the best European navies, and the Italians are good at it as well. All three of us. We have no problem. We take back control of the Mediterranean. So I'm telling you, come with us, come to the Mediterranean, and as an old Bonapartist would tell you, we spent centuries chasing you from the Mediterranean Sea, but now I'm telling you to come with us. It's the only solution. Evidently, we will also stop those who pass through and go to the Channel. I really understand your problem. We have the same problem. Nobody is controlling anything, so we need once again to control all of our borders.
We were listening to Eric Zemmour. Listening to the interview alongside me is the French journalist and analyst Anne-Elisabeth Moutet. Many of the themes that he raises are familiar to British people in British politics. But the way in which he expresses himself, I think, is quite different. I mean, he talks about invasions, tsunamis, he talks about Africans, he talks about Islamic people, he talks about people trying to colonise regions of the French culture. Very strong language. How far is he from the French mainstream, do you think?
He is, in a way, I mean, first of all, the French express themselves differently, and the attitude that in the French system you become French is something that's very strong. And so I would say that he is not in the mainstream, but he certainly shifted what's called the Overton-Lynn window, what you can say and how you can express it, to the right. And that was his influence in French politics, which I think is important. The other thing is he's a columnist. He was a columnist for Le Figaro for 30 years. And he expresses himself still as a journalist. And because he's got faithful readers, each of his books now sell between 500,000 and 1 million, he has not changed, which makes him an easy target in some ways, but also means that he sort of keeps the actual taste of things. I've met him a couple of times, especially since he used to have a television program that was not so political, with a very good friend of his who's left-wing, and that was part of his USP, the fact that he was different from the others that were speaking. Having said that, especially in France, I mean, this is a country that has known unpleasant episodes in her past. And the result is that it's too sharp in a country where you try to obfuscate as much as possible. And what he has mostly done in French politics is make Marine Le Pen much more palatable.
Yes. He made it very clear there that he is to the right of Marine Le Pen. He was criticising her for wanting to continue to allow welfare benefits to people who were seeking asylum. Do you think he's going to be prosecuted again? I mean, obviously that depends a bit on what he says. But I mean to say, you say he's pushed the window to the right, that these things are more sayable than they used to be. Does that suggest perhaps that he's going to go on saying them and find ways of not being prosecuted?
I think yes. I also think that there is such a thing as judicial activism in France, and I will take another example. The former president, Nicolas Sarkozy, has got something like 17 court cases against him, and 15 more or less were dismissed. And there's a kind of slight, let's go for Zemmour, and that's being used at every level of society. Judges taking the initiative, people from the left taking the initiative. I mean, it is perfectly true that there's a danger in what he says, because it would justify racists. But you can have that on one side, and on the other side we can have the fact that people feel that there's a refusal to adapt to France, which is something that people find very, very troublesome in a country where assimilation used to be the norm. And Eric Zemmour is 65. He's a man who remembers France more than 40 years ago, who started as a journalist more than 40 years ago, and he remembers very well when you came to France and from somewhere else and you became French, and France was very welcoming in that. I mean, you really became French, and you have immigrant origins, I have immigrant immigrant origins on my mother's side. We are completely French as long as you speak the language.
Assimilated, yes.
You assimilate to the culture. You're not like what they have in America, which is Italian American, French American, you name it. You become the country. Your ancestors are, the Gauls. And I would like to point out that Asterix the Gaul, whom everybody knows, was created by two immigrants because they, in a sort of, the novel of Joseph Roth, Radetzky March, the empire is kept together by the people who aspire from the outside to become it, to be part of it, and not to come in and say, you have to service my former beliefs and my former country.
I asked him whether he's a racist. He said, no, I don't hate anybody, which is one way of defining it. You've had some contact with him. Is he a racist?
Well, it depends on the definition of racism, which is a bit of a cop-out. I don't think he's a racist. He has, on occasion, said very wounding things, and I suspect, it would be called racism today.
At least it demonstrates that immigration is as big an issue in France as it is in Britain.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Very good. And in the United States, too, by the way, I think. Thank you very much for that commentary from Anne-Elisabeth Moutet. After the break, I'll be speaking to Stefan Kyriazis, who may well have been living on beans and toast since going to the most expensive show ever produced for the London Theatre, Plaza Suite. My question to him will be, was it worth it?
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Stefan Kyriazis has made it into the studio after attending London's most expensive ever theatre show, Plaza Suite, a modern classic by the late, great Neil Simon. Stefan, a show that has tickets at getting on for £400
£395. You get
a great cast.
I mean, it's Sarah Jessica Parker, Matthew Broderick, so married couple. And obviously Hollywood stars, and then the whole Sex and the City sort of phenomenon, which is still going strong. And they're in a Neil Simon play from 1968. And I guess the gimmick with them doing it is they play three different couples, all going through relationship strife, which there's no signs of from our main couple. It's a comedy, a farce, a social commentary. I would walk you through it. The first setup is a couple, sort of middle-aged, and it's very interesting to see Sarah Jessica Parker, a little bit frumpy. We can see from the pictures, it's not the glamour girl that we're used to. And she's a wife. She's booked something for their wedding anniversary. She's got the day wrong and the year wrong, and she's flapping. But underneath it, there's all this melancholy because she knows, pretty sure, that she's losing her husband. So they dance around this. I have to say, for a very long time, it's by far the longest piece, and it just circles and circles, and she just gabbles and gabbles, and you can feel her nerves and her sadness, and he's pretty impassive to it, and he's doing the most cliched thing. He's stumming the secretary, and he's having his midlife crisis. So it's a very accurate portrait sometimes of things that happened, but it's very melancholy, and it's difficult when you've got a couple. Their chemistry is fantastic. But also that somewhat takes away the bite from some of these scenes because you can still kind of feel the affection. However, they both embrace the comedy. He's great at dialogue. What I would say that runs all the way through this, it's dated, especially in representations of women. So the women are pretty much always idiotic to a great extent. So the next scene that comes on, much more fabulous. He looks a bit like Austin Powers, very much like Austin Powers, and she's a kind of good time girl from the 60s, long blonde hair. They're old high school sweethearts. She's got a family in the suburbs. He's become a huge Hollywood big deal. And it's basically a sex farce from the kind of 60s. It's a pastiche on that. Again, huge fun. The character's quite idiotic. And again, she's basically cheating on her husband and children for laughs. So it's a tricky one in these days. And then the final one is probably the best fun. If you like, the first piece is kind of more straight-out comedy. It's pretty much Benny Hill by the time we get to the third one. Jewish couple trying to get their daughter Mimsy out of the bathroom on her wedding day. She won't come out. They're freaking out. He goes out on the balcony, out onto the window ledge. Pigeons attack. There's storms. Tons of energy. So much fun. And they do it so well. And yet, when Mimsy comes out and explains why she's nervous on her wedding day, it's a critique on her parents' marriage. And these are two people that are really just trying to love and support their daughter. It feels all the way through that Simon himself, however great a writer he is, he doesn't like relationships. He doesn't like conventional people. There's quite a lot of disdain in it. And he really doesn't like women. So
Are the two performances by people that we're familiar with through television and film, are the two performances by these two people on stage worth top dollar?
They are excellent, and they disappear pretty much into the characters. So if you want to see them, next price down is $360, then $300, then something. They do a ticket lottery. So every week, if you put in by email, there are cheaper £10 tickets. So you can put in for that. But I came out of it thinking, she was excellent. I'd like to see her in something that really uses her stage talent. We know Broderick is a great stage actor.
It is, by the way, her West End debut.
Yes.
Take us on to your next item, please.
This is wonderful. This is a great event that's happening this Wednesday at Sadler's Wells. It's an event called Empower in Motion. It's for the charity Children Today, 30th anniversary. And it's ballet superstars and disabled people dancing together. And it's all in support of the charity. And we've got a gorgeous clip so you can see what it's all about.
A beautiful trailer. You were clearly very invested in this.
I am. I've been talking to some of the people from the show. So you'll see Denicia there, the girl in the wheelchair, and she's dancing with Alice Bellini, who's the first soloist from the English National Ballet. Their piece is called Reunion, and I spoke to both of them about how important it is. Denicia's been living with cerebral palsy. She's limited to a wheelchair, and talking to... You can see the joy from her there. She's a gorgeous delight to talk to. But she says when she dances, she feels like she's on a cloud. She feels like she's in another universe, but she also feels like she can be herself. And that's a beautiful, important thing. And she's part of a charity that's called I Can Dance, which is under the umbrella of this. And they do therapeutic care for disabled families and children. And then Joe, the boy you saw in the wheelchair there, was a Royal Ballet dancer till he was 14 and then had an accident and is now, again, in disabled. He needs a chair and crutches. But it's a hugely important thing. It's gorgeous. Please, 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 people check it out. It's at Sadler's Wells this Wednesday.
You've got a trailer for another show. Shall we go straight into seeing that trailer?
Good old King and I.
So this was based on a true story about a woman who went out to be a teacher in Siam, as Thailand used to be called, at the end of the 19th century, and developed a relationship, I mean, not a sexual one, but a relationship with the king. It's called The King and I, and it raises the question, really, of whether we are digging up stereotypes from the late 19th century.
Yes, to some extent, but also, you know, we also have stereotypes of the kind of colonial types, and the ones that come in from the British government and the trading companies are all terribly sort of stiff upper lip and moustaches and pompous. And even Anna herself is still very much a product of her world, and her little boy is terribly proper mummy all the time. So, yes, however, obviously the racial stereotypes, they're handled lightly here. And it is very much, you realise, a show where the women are driving the story. There's also the king's first wife, who is really brought up in this production, and she's fantastic. So, yes, I mean, it looks grand. It's like a barge itself. It kind of sails. It's very stately. My God, the music is just... Come on, this music. Apart from Shall We Dance and Whistle a Happy Tune, you've also got things like We Kiss in the Shadow and Hello, Young Lovers. It's exquisite. So, yes, with caveats, it's a nostalgic night out. Just be aware.
Nostalgic night out where?
This one is on at the Dominion, and we should say Plaza Suite is on at the Savoy Theatre.
Very good. Well, thank you very much indeed, Stefan Kyriazis. That's it for the first part of Sunday with Michael Portillo. But stay with us, because we've got another packed hour lying ahead. We're going to be discussing MP safety, the future of unionism in Northern Ireland, and some novel ways to enjoy Yorkshire pudding on National Yorkshire Pudding Day. See you soon.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News. Warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6 is Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my new show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m, where real people get to meet those in power and hold them to account. Every week, we'll be hearing your views from up and down the country in the real world. Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon and welcome to the second hour of Sunday with Michael Portillo. Since Hamas's October the 7th attack against Israel and the subsequent war in Gaza, political tensions in the United Kingdom have risen sharply. This week brought the shocking news that Mike Freer, the Conservative Member of Parliament for Golders Green, will quit politics over fears for his safety from Islamist extremists. For my ethical discussion, I want to ask whether terrorists are now determining our politics by driving out those who have been brave enough to take positions. Can more be done to protect our MPs and so our democratic politics against intimidation and violence? In Northern Ireland, the Democratic Unionist Party says it will re-enter power sharing after withholding its support for 2 years over the Northern Ireland Protocol, which puts a trade barrier in the Irish Sea. DUP leader Geoffrey Donaldson says he's secured vital concessions to that arrangement, but many unionists don't buy that. And that means that once again unionism is split over whether to compromise or to dig in. I'll be discussing that with the editor of the Belfast newsletter. In Canada, the federal court has found that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau acted unlawfully when he invoked the Emergencies Act to quash truckers' protests against a mandate that they should have the COVID vaccine. A member of the Canada Constitutional Foundation, which took the legal action, has spoken to GB News. And finally, to celebrate National Yorkshire Pudding Day, and just in time for your Sunday roast, I'll be sampling some new ways to enjoy that northern delicacy. All of that to come, but first your news headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
Very good afternoon to you. It's 2 minutes past 12. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. UK and US joint strikes against Houthis in Yemen came after repeated warnings, with the Foreign Secretary saying attacks in the Red Sea must now stop. 36 sites across 13 locations were hit by coalition forces in response to what Lord Cameron says are reckless actions which threaten the freedom of navigation and put innocent lives at risk. The Houthi rebels, backed by Iran, have vowed to respond. Former Defence Minister Tobias Ellwood says Britain was right to take further action.
Our economy and our security are symbiotically interconnected. As we see in the Red Sea, if we don't protect those international shipping lanes, if we don't step forward with other nations, then our way of life is now challenged because of these errant nations taking advantage of our ever-wobbly international rules-based order. Britain does step up. That's who we are as a nation, and we need to start doing it again.
The former Home Secretary says the government's Rwanda plan to deter illegal migrants coming to the UK won't work. Suella Braverman told Camilla Tominey the Prime Minister didn't agree to her proposals because they may have upset some communities.
What we were proposing to the Rwanda bill was to exclude individual claims, pretty much, totally, and then also prevent the Strasbourg court from actually blocking flights from taking off. That would have been somewhat controversial amongst the international community, amongst certain sectors, the legal community, for example. And I think that there's a sense that we don't want to upset certain groups.
A man's been arrested on suspicion of dangerous dog offences following the death of a woman in Essex. Police were called to a property in Jaywick where they found a woman with serious injuries. She died at the scene. It's thought she was attacked by 2 dogs. Both were later destroyed. The breed of the animal has yet to be determined. A 39-year-old man remains in custody. The man suspected of a chemical attack in South London on Wednesday continues to evade police. Officers say they're following various lines of inquiry after receiving dozens of calls about Abdul Ezedi, including possible sightings. He was last caught on camera at King's Cross station heading south. That was after a woman and her 2 children were attacked. The mother remains in hospital with what are thought to be life-changing injuries. Former Met Police officer Norman Brennan believes time's against Ezedi, who also has a significant wound on his face.
He's in severe pain. I would suggest sepsis or something like that is very likely to kick in, because when you have acid injuries, you need immediate emergency treatment. Well, we're 4 days on now. He's got quite a horrific injury. He's easily identifiable, but there are times where the police are looking for suspects where they temporarily outwit us. That's why the public have more eyes than the police. The police are doing all the background work.
Shadow Minister Sir Chris Bryan, though, says serious questions need to be asked after Ezedi, who's from Afghanistan, was granted asylum after twice being rejected.
I do look at this horrific acid attack this week
And I want to go, I'm sorry, I don't want to undermine the particular tribunal, but I have no idea if all the facts that we've been told from the papers are true, how on earth that person was granted asylum. So yes, of course, we've always got to look at the rules to make sure that fundamentally we, the British people, are safe.
Demonstrators who climb war memorials could face 3 months in prison and a fine of £1,000. Pro-Palestinian protesters scaled the Royal Artillery Memorial in London following a demonstration outside Parliament in November. Home Secretary James Cleverly described it as an insult and says it can't continue. The measure will apply across England and Wales and is set to be introduced in the House of Commons. The mother of the murdered teenager, Brianna Ghey, has called for a ban on social media apps for under 16s. Two 15-year-olds killed Brianna with a knife in Cheshire last year. Her mother says she wants to see special phones for children with restricted access to social media apps and inappropriate search terms to be flagged to parents. Scarlett Jenkinson, who was jailed on Friday, watched videos of torture and murder online before attacking Brianna. A new cancer vaccine made by the pharmaceutical firm Moderna is being trialled on British patients. The mRNA technology used to make COVID-19 jabs works by helping the body recognise and fight cancer cells. Experts say the vaccines can lead to a generation of off-the-shelf cancer therapies. The vaccine's aimed at people with advanced melanoma, lung cancer and other solid tumour cancers. Well, for the latest on our stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or you can go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Michael.
Thank you, Aaron Armstrong. The news that Mike Freer, the Member of Parliament for Finchley and Golders Green, is to step down at the next election over fears for his safety has sparked a debate about whether violent militants are now successfully driving out of politics those brave enough to argue for democratic principles. Freer, who's openly gay and has asserted his support for Israel, faced numerous threats, including from a group calling itself Muslims Against Crusades. His office was set ablaze on Christmas Eve. His constituency team wears stab vests after it emerged that the murderer of Member of Parliament Sir David Amess, Ali Harbi Ali, had previously reconnoitred Mike Freer's North London headquarters. To discuss that, I'm joined by the former Labour Member of Parliament Ivor Caplin and by someone who hopes to enter Parliament, Johnny Luck, the prospective Conservative parliamentary candidate for Milton Keynes Central. Welcome back and welcome to GB News. Johnny, is it on your mind, as you seek election, that you might be the subject of an attack, that you might be the victim of violence?
Well, firstly, I'm very sad to see Mike step down. And we have a lot of great MPs out there, and it's really worrying to see MPs worried about whether they want to continue in office. It's even more concerning, I'd say, for parliamentary candidates, because it's election year, there's thousands of candidates across the country, and they have even less support. And so it does come across my mind. I don't want voters to feel too sorry for me. It's a massive privilege to go out and compete. The key is to make sure that we don't feel like we can't go out and knock on doors. I've knocked on over like 4,000 doors. We have to continue to engage with voters. I think there's a higher demand for voters to see their candidates, see their MPs, and so we need to make sure that is encouraged and not have a chilling effect that stops that.
Does it make you wonder, though, whether, as your political career advanced, whether you would dare to be outspoken? I mean, if I may say it, you know, I hope that at the moment you're in a relatively safe position. But one day, when you are a household name and when you're associated with certain points of view, then I put it to you that you might be in danger. Is that on your mind now?
I try not to put it in my mind. There are moments even now where I knock. If you're knocking on enough doors, you'll find some individuals who are maybe a little bit hostile, a little bit nasty. And I think it's about providing that kind of guidance. But to be honest, I don't have enough time or bandwidth to think about the fears. I have to keep going because I don't want anyone to defeat us in that sense. I think it's a fundamental part of our democracy to make sure that we keep going out and keep knocking. And the vast majority of voters are very positive and are actually excited and delighted when there is a candidate on their doorstep, and I encourage that. However, we need some guidance to make sure that there is some kind of guidelines on how to go out. You know, if you're out in the dark on your own, Maybe there needs to be some way of making sure that you have loved ones who know where you're going, making sure that maybe you have a good relationship with the local police service or even with council authorities, making sure that all candidates have a level playing field in terms of support. We have more support in the Conservative Party, but we need to have that for everybody.
Ivor Kaplan, I would put it to you that I think there's a danger of representing this as though it were a new issue, which it certainly is not.
Correct.
I came into Parliament because my predecessor, Tony Berry, was murdered in the Brighton bomb. My parliamentary private secretary was David Amos. I was a very good friend of Ian Gow. I did not know Jo Cox, but Jo Cox nonetheless was murdered for doing her constituency duties, not for any other reason. So I put it to you that for some time now, it has been known that if you want to be a Member of Parliament, actually you have to be brave.
Michael, I'm in the category of people today who think there's been too much talking, particularly since 2016, but we could go further back to Ian Gow, of course, just over the way from my old constituency. And we could then say, what are we going to do about it again and again and again? And I think that the House of Commons and the main political parties need to understand that in this next year, we need to sort this out. I personally think that all 650 members of Parliament should have the benefit of security. I know that sounds very American. I know it sounds that people will say, well, that's not the way it works. But for both of us, we have experienced security when we've been out and about in our ministerial capacities. And what I think needs to happen now is that the House itself should set up a situation where all members of Parliament are given some level of security, because this can't go on, and it will go on if we're not careful.
That is a very expensive proposal.
Correct.
And I would also be quite sceptical about how effective it would be. For example, I remember being with Ari Neve a few days before he was killed. He was accompanied by a young police officer. I was not struck at the time that I thought his security was very effective, and certainly that's how it proved to be. He was killed by a bomb in his car, and his car blew up in the House of Commons, surrounded by security. So I'm afraid to say that I find your proposal both expensive and also unlikely to be effective.
Well, I understand why anyone would say that, you in particular, Michael. That's absolutely fine. I just think that over these last few years, we've seen far too much just talking about it. There's been no real activity from the House of Commons authorities or from the main political parties, including my own, that actually set out what this security needs to be. That's what I'm saying needs to happen. There's no way that we could have... going all that way back to what happened in the Commons those days, or to Ian Gow, or to David Amos or Joe. These were one-offs, but there's too many altogether now in this period that it keeps happening. And for new candidates like Johnny, they should at least have the ability to think, I'm not going to be under that sort of pressure. Irrespective. Mike Freer was a very good MP, someone I've known pretty well. He's, he like myself, is Jewish and very supportive of the Jewish community, as well as being openly gay. And what's the problem? There was no problem. And he should never have been put through what has happened in the last 3 or 4 months by people there.
Johnny, as you can see, what I'm arguing is that I don't think there is a fix to this problem. I don't think we're going to be able to conjure up the security forces who are going to solve this for us. And I think I'm just saying, isn't it really the case that amongst the many qualities, and I mean this seriously, that you need to step forward to be a Member of Parliament, one of them is going to be physical courage?
Yes, you do have to have a very thick skin. You have to have the physical and mental endurance. But just pick up on security, and I guess what I'm really interested in is what are the solutions, right? So one, of course, is security. But the other is to try and reduce the overall temperature in the political debate. Now, there's a very small percentage within that crowd of voters who are potentially dangerous, right? So obviously there's laws against intimidation and against crime already. But that's one side. But there's a much wider population of voters or residents who, frankly, are very angry, potentially angry at MPs. And we need to ask ourselves some really tough questions of why this is happening and why it's getting worse. And I was very struck, I think a couple of days ago, Angela Rayner was on a different TV programme talking about how even she, I presume an extrovert, is afraid of going out, and she's talked about how things are getting worse. My only point there is, of course, I would argue that she has also been part of that issue, right? Because she called us names, Tory scum. Yes. And she took a month to kind of say sorry afterwards, and that has, of course, caused an increased amount of tension for my colleagues and myself. And is it okay? I'll show you some specific examples as well. So here I have a campaign by the Milton Keynes Labour Party, and they basically said that we're dumping nuclear waste in Milton Keynes, which is completely fictional, but they've made a whole campaign out of it. They've created a fake newspaper, established 1965.
You're getting here into constituency matters, which I think could get us into problems with Ofcom.
No, but I guess the point is we need to challenge some of these issues.
I understand, but I think we'll move on. I think if you put your proposal for more security, those trying to devise it would say, well, what we have to do is we have to target this a bit. It has to be people of higher profile, it has to be people who are more at danger. And in that context, picking up from the previous point that Johnny was making, do we face a problem here with militancy, specifically Islamic militancy, or is there a broader problem about violent language, name-calling and so on?
Well, I think there is a problem. I mean, I've been up in London on numerous Saturdays trying to do different things, none not connected with any of the demonstrations. But what are these people doing? What on earth are they doing in London? 20,000 of them. What do they want? They keep talking about Hamas as though it's some great thing. Hamas is an awful, terrible organisation that, of course, is not permitted by the United Kingdom. And what we then see is these same people starting to criticise either political parties or even Israel itself just because they have a different view. This is absolutely madness, and it's not healthy for the United Kingdom. And I think it's that kind of level. I think that's where Johnny was going without his bit of paper. But I think that what actually he's saying is, look, there are things that happen that are just not the right thing to say or do. And that's what we've been seeing since October the 7th as well.
Yeah, I guess the point is I want to encourage positive in campaigning. Yeah. And that there's a tendency to be very negative, because you see it on social media and it kind of transfers into the real world.
Very good. We will remember you for your positivity today. Thank you very much, Ivor Captain and Johnny Luck. And may I say seriously, best wishes to both of you, because you're in exposed positions. Stay safe. After the break, the quandary facing unionists in Northern Ireland as their main party, the DUP, prepares to re-enter power sharing under a nationalist First Minister, and whilst a trade barrier has appeared in the Irish Sea and within the United Kingdom between the province and Great Britain. Stay with us.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Welcome back. There was an historic political breakthrough in Northern Ireland this week as the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party struck a deal to re-enter power sharing at Stormont. Sinn Féin's Michelle O'Neill is now First Minister and the DUP's Emma Little-Bengelli is Deputy First Minister. Jeffrey Donaldson says that he's secured vital concessions to the Windsor Framework, which is the arrangement that sustains a trade barrier between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom. But rival unionists counter that Northern Ireland will remain economically cut off from Great Britain. Unionists therefore find themselves in the familiar quandary of deciding how much to compromise. To discuss that, I'm joined by Roderick Crawford, Senior Research Fellow at Policy Exchange and the author of the paper The Northern Ireland Protocol, The Origins of the Current Crisis. And I'm also joined by Ben Lowry, editor of the Belfast News. Let me start with you, Roderick. As I understand it, the changes that have been made to the Windsor Framework have not involved discussions between the UK government, or certainly not formal discussions between the UK government and the European Union, and I would therefore suggest that the changes that have been made cannot be very substantial. Please comment.
I think in practice that the changes are substantial. I think the Windsor Framework went a very long way to addressing the problems with a so-called trade barrier in goods between GB and NI. It fell a little bit short. I think there was a sense of disappointment, including for me, with it. But I think this latest set of negotiations has taken it over the line to a system that can now run effectively in practice, and I think is constitutionally a substantial improvement. I think we're over the line in terms of there isn't a trade barrier any longer of any import.
Roderick, help me with that, if you would. I realise it's very complicated, but in a line, what is it that the DUP has been given by this new agreement that it didn't have in the Windsor Framework already?
has been given a guarantee that 80% of all trade from GB to NI will travel through a UK internal market system that won't be subject to checks.
And Roderick, that's interesting. Why on earth wasn't that offered ages ago?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, it goes back to the origins of the UK leaving the European Union and the reaction that had in Brussels, and I think a desire to punish us and not work with us. I think when we broke out of the club, we became the sort of bad boy of Europe, and we were punished, and we weren't seen as trustworthy. And I think on top of that, specifically for Northern Ireland, the Good Friday Agreement was seriously misrepresented to the European Union. It's very much a North-South affair, out of context of Northern Ireland being an integral part of the UK, full part of the UK, and integral and fully integrated in the UK's internal market and dependent on that. And the so-called all-Ireland economy was sort of exaggerated as something that needed to be protected. And we basically lost control of the negotiations very early on, and it's taken us 5 or 6 years to claw back most of the ground we lost. You know, and that has now been essentially achieved.
Thank you, Roderick. Let me turn to Ben Lowry. Ben, explain to me why the DUP felt under pressure to return to Stormont, given that in the process they would be putting Michelle O'Neill into the First Minister job.
Yeah, OK, thanks for having me. And can I just say very quickly that the title of our paper is the Belfast Newsletter, and I'm not trying to be pernickety when I point that out, because we are the oldest English language daily paper in the world, and I just wanted to get the title right for anybody who's watching it. But in answer to your question, why did they feel under pressure to return with Michelle O'Neill, a party leader of the northern leader of a party that still strongly defends past IRA violence? In fact, many of our readers, we're a unionist newspaper, would say that Sinn Féin glorifying of IRA violence, allied to the way legacy has turned out, which has turned, we would say, almost entirely against the security forces who prevented civil war. That is a big problem. But the system here is such that I think we need to step back and remember the system that we have. The system of enforced power sharing, I mean, you could say the miracle is that it's ever worked at all, is the equivalent to Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump having to be in power at all times. It's equivalent to Nigel Farage and Jeremy Corbyn having to be in power at all times. So it's a dysfunctional system, but the government very much wanted it back. It wants to say that the Irish Sea border it doesn't exist. I disagree with Roderick. We've run articles from Roderick, been very pleased to do so. A distinguished voice, but the underlying Irish Sea border is there. And a part of the pressure that was applied to the DUP was that if they didn't go back, there would be an increase, say, for the Irish government. This was said explicitly at times, it was hinted at other times, and that is a constitutional outrage. That is a fundamental breach of the Belfast Agreement and the principle of consent. So underneath all the smiles and the happiness yesterday and the relief and the joking, there's a really serious divide here within unionists about the best way to go forward in the face of that kind of pressure.
Yeah, a divide indeed, Ben Lowry. How will that manifest itself? Do we think that unionism is going to be in perpetual crisis now?
Will it be in perpetual crisis? Unionism is currently divided into three parties. The Ulster Unionist Party, which was the mainstream party, which has become very liberal and very much in favour of you have to work with things as they are. The Democratic Unionist Party, which is the biggest, which is leaning that way. And the traditional unionist voice, which says that Stormont is a disaster. I think that's a mess. Unionism, the total unionist vote is declining. We hear about demographic change, the increase in the Catholic population. That's true, not as much as we'd say. Nationalism hasn't grown that much. But unionism is not fashionable and has declined. So I envisage a realignment into two. Having said that, Yesterday, we saw, apart from Jim Allister of the TUV, this party that's very concerned, called hardline, but very opposed to Stormont, there was no sign of this dissent. And I'm just wondering, is unionism at the moment sort of feeling defeated, that it has to accept Stormont? And remember, this is an argument, and there's an argument against devolution in Scotland as well as in Northern Ireland, that devolution intrinsically breaks up the UK. Are we now in the situation that unionists just feel we have to play with it, go with it, have to accept concessions, low-level concessions perpetually, and that's the way it is? Or is there going to be this division into two, which I think would be a logical division between those who say that we have to work with Stormont and those who say, no, unionists can't keep giving their imprint to a process that will result in the end of the UK vis-a-vis Northern Ireland?
And Ben, again, addressing here great British viewers, are we nearer to polls on either side of the border about a united Ireland?
The polling for Northern Ireland staying in the UK is pretty good. And even Sinn Féin I think that when Brexit did change things, and as it happens, I was in a unionist camp that thought Brexit was too perilous, that you don't hear much about. I think, though, that it has only changed things by about 4%. So you might have gone from over 60% support for the UK to under 60%. I don't think the problem for unionists is a border poll. I think that the problem for unionists is, and I think Sinn Féin know this, the undermining of the UK in multiple different ways without coming to a border poll, so that our membership in the UK is very significantly neutered prior to any border poll, if it ever happens, which I suspect over the medium to longer term it will at some point.
Many thanks to you both. I'm sorry we didn't have longer. Thank you very much to Ben Lowry from the Belfast Newsletter and Roderick Crawford. In a few minutes, we'll hear from the Canada Constitution Foundation, which has successfully sued Prime Minister Justin Trudeau over his use of the Emergencies Act to quash anti-COVID vaccine protests. Before that, here are the latest news headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
And it's 12:31 here in the GB newsroom. In some breaking news for you, police have offered a £20,000 reward for information that may lead to the arrest of the suspected chemical attacker Abdul Azedi. He was last caught on camera at London's King's Cross station heading south on Wednesday. Police also say forensic tests have shown the substance used during the attack was a very strong, concentrated, corrosive substance, either liquid sodium hydroxide or liquid sodium carbonate. UK and US joint strikes against Houthis in Yemen came after repeated warnings, with the Foreign Secretary saying attacks in the Red Sea must stop. 36 sites across 13 locations in Yemen were hit by coalition forces in response to what Lord Cameron says are reckless actions which threaten the freedom of navigation and are putting innocent lives at risk. The Houthi rebels, backed by Iran, have vowed to respond. A man's been arrested on suspicion of dangerous dog offences following the death of a woman in Essex. Police were called to a property in the seaside village of Jaywick, where they found a woman with serious injuries. She died at the scene. It's thought she was attacked by two dogs. Both were later destroyed. The breed of the animal has yet to be confirmed. The King has been seen attending the Sunday church service this morning. He's been spotted smiling and waving at the crowd that gathered at the entrance to St Mary Magdalene Church in Sandringham. It's the first sighting of His Majesty since his treatment in hospital for an enlarged prostate. And you can sign up as GB News Alerts for the latest. Scan the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Aaron Armstrong. When the Canadian government issued a mandate that those regularly crossing the border with the United States must be vaccinated against COVID-19, it sparked huge protests from truck drivers. Lorries blockaded parts of the capital, Ottawa, as well as some of the border crossings. And in response, the federal Premier, Justin Trudeau, invoked the Emergencies Act, which is legislation designed for major national emergencies to quash the demonstrations and to freeze the bank accounts of protesters. Last week, a judge at Canada's federal court found that that government action was unlawful. Josh Dehas works at the Canadian Constitution Foundation, which took the legal action against Justin Trudeau.
This happened back in January 2022, and Canadian truckers had been through a lot during COVID-19, and they just learned that the Government of Canada intended to go ahead with a vaccine mandate, which would require them to be vaccinated to cross the Canada-US border. And this meant for the 15% of truckers who were not vaccinated at the time that they would either need to, give up their right to choose whether to be vaccinated or potentially lose their livelihood. So they started this convoy protest where big rig trucks from across the country started heading toward Ottawa. And the plan was to converge on Ottawa for a protest outside of Parliament. And they gained a lot of support along the way. Canadians turned out to the sides of streets and to bridges and overpasses with their maple leafs to cheer on the truckers. And when they got to Ottawa, their plan, well, they didn't really seem to have a plan, but they said they were not leaving until these mandates were gone. And so they arrived in late January, and they parked their big trucks downtown in Ottawa. It's a really small city, and so this was pretty disruptive to the people who live downtown. They honked their horns. They basically had a big street party with, bouncy castles and hot tubs, and it was pretty disruptive to the people of Ottawa. But the more serious issue was there were some border blockades in other parts of the country that were sort of spawned by this protest, and those were being dealt with under normal sort of criminal code powers, policing powers, but the situation in Ottawa was continuing. And so Justin Trudeau decided that the solution, rather than waiting for the police to kick in and do their job and remove the protesters, that he was going to create some new laws that were only available to him through this Emergency Act, which is an extraordinary act meant for, wars and pandemics, a sort of act of last resort. Justin Trudeau used this act to do two things primarily. One was he essentially made it illegal to attend or assist a trucker protest. And the second thing that they did was freezing of bank accounts. So the law basically said that anyone who's a designated person, and a designated person was someone who's assisting with or participating in these protests, could have their bank accounts frozen. And what ended up happening was the Royal Canadian Mounted Police basically just made a list of people, gave it to the banks, and they had their checking accounts, their credit cards, their cryptocurrencies, all their assets frozen without any due process, without a warrant. Just suddenly you're sort of locked out of all of your accounts. We launched this action just over a week after invocation, and that's because we didn't know, how long this was going to be in place, and we thought these are some of the most serious violations of people's rights, the right to freedom of expression and the right to be secure against unreasonable searches and seizures that we had ever seen. This was a really extraordinary measure, and we wanted to fight back right away, so we got into gear really, really quickly. The government put forward several arguments, and they actually wrote this down in their declaration. And one of the arguments they made was that there was a threat to the security of Canada, and that simply was not true. The judge who looked at this said, threats to the security of Canada is defined in the legislation means serious harm against persons or property with an ideological, political, or religious aim, and that simply wasn't what was happening here. This was a non-violent protest. It wasn't as if these people had guns. There was no arrests for any violence. This was extremely peaceful, except for maybe horn honking and a bit of blockading of the streets. But they also said that this was justified because of the economic harm. And they said, the economy is recovering from COVID, and this is preventing some trade from getting across the Canada-US border, which was no longer true by the time these measures came into place. And they also cited things like social cohesion and our relationship with the United States. And those types of things are not justification that's available to them for invoking this extraordinary legislation. This particular government, the Trudeau government, they had actually run an entire election in 2021 on whether we should have extremely harsh vaccine mandates and lockdown measures. And so their whole brand is sort of tied up in the idea of, getting back at the minority who chose not to get vaccinated and sort of scapegoating them for all of the problems that occurred during the COVID-19 crisis. So they sort of felt that they had to respond to this group that was very opposed to them. And if it had been another protest, like an Indigenous protest or a Black Lives Matter protest, I really doubt that they would have used such extreme measures. And we had smaller but quite serious Indigenous protests where, for example, rail lines were blocked, and that meant a lot of trade couldn't happen for a long period of time right before COVID. And we saw very little response, very little reaction from the federal government. So it really did seem that this was, this response was because of who was protesting against them.
That was Josh de Haas at the Canadian Constitution Foundation. Dawn Neeson will be taking over from me at 1 o'clock. Welcome to the studio.
And what a pleasure it will be. We're trying to outdo each other on the jacket front. You are winning hands down at the moment.
We make the most
annoying.
We make the most of colour television, don't we?
Have you ever run out of colour to wear?
No, not yet.
Not yet, right, OK, fine.
I've been building them up for many more years than you.
Not that many, I bet. We have got a cracking show coming up. We're doing a full Sunday service. We are going to the UK's fattest town to get stuffed on chicken.
Right.
I know, not telling you which one, you have to watch to find out which one it is. We are going to go to church to see how many converted Muslim asylum seekers we can find.
Yes.
Not that many, I should imagine, no. Including the ones obviously missing at the moment. And we are doing a ghost story. I do like a ghost story. It's going to really put the willies up you because it's about transgender ghosts.
So you've obviously been rather shocked
I love the way you look at me like, oh, yes. Yes, Michael, go.
You've obviously been rather shocked by the news that the Church of England and other churches have been heavily involved in granting, is that the right word, conversions to people who later say that they're unable to return to their country of origin because they become Christian and therefore they might be persecuted. And that has shocked you, I think.
I get annoyed that they are relying on the word of the church, vouching for these people. Because there was an interview with the Bishop of Liverpool, and he was saying that while he's had 400 conversions of people who are seeking asylum, from people that have been granted asylum, not a single one.
Well, there we are. Dawn will be here just after 1 o'clock. And after the break that's coming now, I'll explore some novel ways to enjoy the Yorkshire pudding. Stay with us, please.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show.
Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse.
It's news, but it's this close to entertainment.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Many of you will be preparing at this very moment to tuck into your Sunday roasts, perhaps with plates laden with toothsome Yorkshire pudding. It's National Yorkshire Pudding Day, and to celebrate this internationally hailed British accompaniment to meat, we tasked food blogger and host of the Crazy Sexy Food podcast, Hannah Harley-Young, to suggest innovative ways to enjoy this Epicurean delight. Hannah, you got on brilliantly.
Let's
just lift these up for a moment.
Yes.
And show them to the camera. Just angle them down a bit. You see, what strikes me is that you've produced something here that is so colourful and appealing. Because I was going to say to you that although I wrote all that stuff about the Epicurean delight and all of that, I've actually always found the Yorkshire pudding a little bit dull, a little bit bland. And I don't recognise this. You've cheered it up. You've cheered it up beyond recognition, and well done.
Well, I don't know if a lot of people know, but a Yorkshire pudding is basically a pancake batter, just cooked in a different way. And if you think about a pancake by itself, it's quite bland as well.
Yes.
And they're kind of just the vehicle to add beautiful ingredients onto. So I thought I'd do 2 different savoury options and 2 sweet options for you.
And I think you've done absolutely brilliantly, even before I taste them, because they look so good. A little bit of Yorkshire pudding history on National Yorkshire Pudding Day.
I've become an expert all of a sudden.
How far back do we think they go?
So sort of around the 18th century.
Yes.
It was around sort of the time when wheat flour became very popular in baking, and northern cooks were trying to find a way, really, when they were roasting their meats, what to do with all that dripping that was sort of coming off the meat. So they created a batter that they could essentially cook in said oil, and that became dripping pudding. But there was a cookery writer called Hannah Glass who apparently...
Hannah?
I know. Listen, this was meant to be. This was meant to be. As I said, this is my big break. I am now the Yorkshire pudding girl. But Hannah Glass was a cookery writer, and she has been sort of found to be the first person to coin the term Yorkshire pudding in print.
I'm referring, obviously referring to the county of Yorkshire, but not particularly because that was its place of origin.
Somewhere north of the M25.
That's lost in the mist. Right, now, it may not be very easy to eat these.
No, this is going to be interesting.
But let's have a go.
OK.
So what have you put into that one?
So here we have mortadella, which is an Italian sort of cured meat sausage, and I've got a bit of pecorino, some pesto, and a little bit of olive oil and pepper. Mortadella is one of my favourites. What do you think?
Oh, I think it's fantastic. But, of course, what I'm tasting is the mortadella and the pecorino, which, you know, have overwhelmed the Yorkshire pudding. But I am getting the texture of the Yorkshire pudding, which is nice.
But as I said, similar with a pancake, this is just the vehicle to kind of get the food sort of onto something a little bit more interesting.
So, most of this is, it's obvious how you did it. So you started with a Yorkshire pudding.
Yeah.
You leave a little hole in your Yorkshire pudding.
Yeah.
It has to have a little dent in the top.
I also actually, particularly with these two, I let them cool. And I know that that sounds a little bit odd for people out there who I know are the traditionalists who only associate these with a roast dinner. But if they were going to be hot, it would start cooking the salmon. It would start melting the cream cheese. Personally, I would prefer them at room temperature.
Yes.
This is quite a sophisticated one. You could put a bit of caviar on top if you really wanted to push the boat out.
So I've got smoked salmon, and what's under there? Cream cheese?
You've got some cream cheese and some chives.
And some chives.
You can have a squeeze of lemon if you want.
Yes, I will. I will indeed, I will. Look at that.
These are good. I like these ones.
These surpass even the first one.
Yeah, I think so, actually. Because there's nothing more classic than smoked salmon and cream cheese. Also, they're very light and not heavy. I find sometimes when people... Like, I would use these two as something fun for a dinner party. And a lot of people associate smoked salmon and cream cheese with bellinis, which I find sometimes to be a bit too heavy and a bit too sort of doughy.
And personally, I prefer the slightly crisp nature of the Yorkshire pudding to the bagel.
Which
otherwise
that's controversial. OK,
right,
over
now,
to dessert.
Time for pudding.
So this is one of my favourite combinations ever. This is Nutella, fresh strawberries and some crushed up hazelnuts.
Not Nutella.
Oh, come on.
No, not Nutella. I'm not sure I'm going to enjoy this one.
Why?
Well, because, I don't know, all of this is so sophisticated. Nutella has just been a come down. Here we go. Nutella and strawberry and what? Is that nut?
I dropped a strawberry.
Throw them around the studio, don't worry.
Yeah, it's all right, don't worry. That is Nutella, fresh strawberries and hazelnuts. This is also an ode to a very big day that's coming up, which is obviously Pancake Day.
Oh, yeah.
So we're on track.
Well, I enjoyed the strawberry and the hazelnut and the Yorkshire pudding. Well, less of a fan of the Nutella, which also ended up all over my fingers. So now we get to the last.
Yes, and I also wanted to ask you a quick question about these. So this is a take on your scones with clotted cream and jam. How do you do your scones usually?
The other way around.
OK.
I put the cream on top of the jam.
Yep.
So have you put strawberry jam on there?
Yes.
And have you put... is that clotted cream?
Yes, it is.
Oh, you really...
I don't do anything halfway.
Do this. Very good.
What do you think?
I think it's quite successful. I do miss the scone a bit.
Yep.
But it is surprising complementarity. Is that what you say? They go together quite well.
Yep. Also, I don't know, I think what also is quite interesting is the evolution of the Yorkshire pudding. So when they created these dripping puddings, before it was even called a Yorkshire pudding, it then evolved into being a starter, and they would be quite large puddings, and it would be filled with onion gravy. Now, my generation would know that as like a toad in the hole with the onion gravy poured on top. That's what I used to grow up with, was toad in the holes. As that evolved, it then started becoming part of the components of a roast dinner.
And I think also this reflected social classes. So some people would be having their Yorkshire pudding just kind of soaked in grease or soaked in gravy, whatever they could afford. Maybe they could afford a sausage, and maybe eventually they could afford some roast meat.
Yeah.
Any tips on how to do... Let's go back to the classic Yorkshire pudding.
OK.
The one that you have with roast beef or whatever. Any tips on how to get them perfect every time?
Right. So I've had a few complicated experiences. I will say that I think they are quite difficult.
Stick to Yorkshire pudding.
Yeah, exactly. I would say the absolute rule of thumb is if you are making them this size, which you would then bake in like a little muffin case or a ramekin, you've got to put some oil in, get that into the oven on a roasting tray. That oil has to be boiling, bubbling hot, and then you pour the batter in. If the oil is not hot enough, they will not rise, and that whole sort of reaction will not happen. So that's the biggest thing I will say.
That's a very good tip. And to sum up again, so we've got mortadella and pecorino, we've got smoked salmon and cream cheese, we've got strawberry and nut and Nutella, and we've got raspberry jam or strawberry jam and what cream did you call it?
This was a clotted cream.
Clotted cream, that was the word I couldn't get.
Strawberry jam.
Very good, Hannah. Absolutely fantastic. Others of you may be settling down now with more conventional Yorkshire puddings, but you might give this a thought. Hannah, I think, made a tremendous effort there. She invented those absolutely out of nothing, out of her pure imagination, and I thank her very much indeed. And I also thank all of my guests who have been here today, joining me on a Sunday. I'm afraid to say that I won't be here next week, but I'll be back in 2 weeks' time. I'm going to miss you very badly, but I wish you a wonderful rest of your weekend. Bye-bye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vaughtry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. Sunshine is in relatively short supply across much of the UK today, and it's due to these moist southwesterly winds filtering around this area of high pressure, filtering in a lot of cloud from the Atlantic, so misty and murky around some coastal areas. But there are a few brighter breaks around for some central eastern areas, and there will be some clearer spells overnight as well. A very miserable night to come, though, for western Scotland, with heavy and persistent rainfall right throughout the whole night. Mild for most of us underneath all this cloud, generally temperatures around 7 to 9 degrees Celsius, but a touch of frost is possible across the far north, where we hold on to some slightly colder air. And where that rain band pushes into the colder air ahead of it, we could see some snow, at least over the hills of the Highlands, Caithness, perhaps even into Orkney during Monday as well. Very wet, though, for western Scotland, 170 millimetres of rain potentially building up in a few spots by the end of the day. Some localised disruption is possible. Cloudy elsewhere with outbreaks of rain, patchy drizzle around at times. Again, a few brighter slots possible, but another mild one for all of us. Temperatures around 10 to 12 degrees Celsius. On Tuesday, the rain will eventually clear from western Scotland and start pushing its way further southwards, Northern Ireland, Northern England, maybe even seeing some hill snow over the Pennines, the Mourne Mountains as well. Cloudy, blustery to the south of that, but the cold air behind that weather front will start to sink its way southward during the rest of the week, filtering to more areas. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock Monday to Thursday on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain.